This is ArtSense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with Mad Butter, a pioneering figure in the evolution of AI art. As a classically trained artist and tech entrepreneur, Mad Butter has dedicated himself to fostering a vibrant community and creating educational resources for AI artists. He has co-hosted the daily AI Art Today program on X Spaces, formerly Twitter Spaces, for over 3 years, and is currently launching a groundbreaking AI program at the School of Visual Arts in New York. And now, a conversation about unlocking the potential of AI art with Mad Butter. Mad Butter, thank you so much for joining me today on the ArtSense podcast. Mad Butter, we spent some time together at most recently NFT NYC in New York, talking about the advent of AI and art, and particularly at that event, how that intersects with NFTs and that space. But I wanted to have you on because there is still a world of knowledge about the advent of AI art and where it's headed that I need an education, and I think my listeners would love an education. And I really can't think of anyone better to talk to about that than you. You host a daily Twitter space, so I guess what they want to call an X space these days, called AI Art Today, which is really well attended and listened to, and a kind of a cornerstone for engagement in the AI art community. Maybe we can start with you just kind of telling a story about the origins of AI art today. When did you see that there was a demand for talking daily about AI art?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Craig. I really appreciate it. It was really a pleasure to hang out with you at NFT NYC, and always fun to meet another art nerd. And I think we instantly kind of figured that we were kind of dialed into some similar interests, and that's always fun. NFT being one of them, and as you know, I'm very hard on the AI side. I've done a whole series of different things in digital media for 30 years, and I do think that I've hit a bunch of the trends as we went along. But I do think that that everything I've been interested in has something to do with manipulating and tinkering with technology. I mean, way back when I was a printmaker, because I think. And I did photo silkscreen and things like that, because it's a very similar attempt to sort of look at a set of rules and see how you can tinker and adjust things. And so, I mean, I've proceeded through, I'm not going to give you the whole bio now, but I'm just saying that that when generative art came around, it became a big thing. I have some proficiency in coding from my professional life. I'm not a great coder, not a computer scientist guy, but I'm always very intrigued by the intersection of art and coding. So that was a nice entryway into the whole AI thing too, because I do think that generative art I found fascinating. I love following it. I love trying to make it. I did what I call generative photography, where I would take photos and manipulate them photographically. Manipulate them algorithmically, so that there's still like all the elements in our photographic, but they're very abstract because they're so highly pixel sorted and manipulated and that sort of thing. And that was kind of like what my art was for a long time. After I sort of stopped working for a bit, I've had a long working career where I'm going in and out of fine art and design and tech. But that got me into the NFT revolution, and I started attending X Spaces there. So then I have my introduction to X, which I avoided Twitter. I never understood it, never understood social media. I'm too old for that. But when I was very eager to go down the rabbit hole of NFTs and try to negotiate what they meant, I found these X Spaces to be, the place to go to really get, the information. And I love the community that built around it. And as AI art started to come into the picture, I of course latched onto it because I'm very interested in that intersection of coding and art. And then I found some X Spaces, or some Twitter Spaces as they were back then, AI Art Today by my friend Mars. My now friend Mars, and I listened and I thought it was fascinating. And he was an early at this, maybe 2020 or 2021. And then he brought me on as a co-host. And I said I'd do it once a week, and then I ended up doing twice a week and 3 times a day. And then then I did it every day along with him. And then before you know it, every weekday I'm doing basically 2 to 3 hours every morning, hosting this space with a kind of a fairly large backbench of other co-hosters and people that mingle in and out. And we really just, end up talking there's so much to talk about AI. It's such a fast moving field that there's always something to talk about, whether that's the tech news, what happened in, what OpenAI just dropped yesterday, what this workflow is, has anyone used this new tool, or whether it's one of our communities having a big drop and we're promoting it. Or whether we're interviewing people, like we interview a lot of entrepreneurs who are like, the head of Runway ML. Chris Valenzuela, we interviewed. We just interviewed yesterday the CEO of Civitai, which is a massive database of models. Tomorrow, I told you we're going to have an interview of Gene Kogan, an original AI artist and also educator and site builder for AI tools. It's that sort of thing. So it really is a mix of things. There's plenty to do. The AI Art Today community is kind of growing, and everyone's very passionate. And we got these regulars that come every single morning, and we mix it up.
Let's dive a little bit back into your bio. I know you say you wanted to spare us that, but I think it'd be interesting for people to have the perspective of knowing that you have a serious art background. Can you talk a little bit about your journey from the studio and the printmaking studio all the way to Southeast Asia and back, and kind of your journey and how that's all kind of influenced where you found yourself when this technology broke?
Yeah, I would say one aspect about my life that is probably very, very formative in terms of who I turned out to be was that I grew up around the world. I was born in South America to American expat parents. My parents are, North American, but were working and living in South America. So I lived my first 6 years there. And I lived in Thailand as a kid, and then went to school in the U.S., including with a big focus on art history, communications, and a bunch of other stuff, classic liberal arts education. So then when I got out of school, I was just kind of living in the East Village, doing the East Village Bohemian thing for a while. And that's when I got into the whole Silkscreen kind of thing. I really always wanted to be an artist. So worked at School of Visual Arts for a long, long time. And then when computers came around, I instantly got excited about them. And then as a Silkscreen assistant in the department, we would help people in the computer art MFA department come downstairs and we'd help them print their work as a way to sort of create, sort of physical output for their work. And I got so excited about that, I joined the program. I got a master's in MFA in computer art at the School of Visual Arts. And this is like graduated in 92, ages ago. So at the very dawn of computer art. That was super exciting. Then I ended up teaching there for a number of years. What happened after that? I started at .com just with some SVA graduates, and we were going to do very groovy, interactive multimedia CD-ROMs. We're very into the sort of art aspect of it, and sort of reinventing the world with hypertext and everything that, the web was going to change the world, and we were at the forefront of understanding what it could do. And then people kept throwing money at us and jobs. So the next thing I know,
it's a terrible thing, isn't it?
I'm just, like, I don't know what happened. I'm not trained at all to run a company, or not even, capable, or not even. But the next thing we know, we have a massive .com. We brought in all kinds of suits to run it over us, and to do the mergers and acquisitions. And that was a company called Rare Medium. And before I know it, that company has, 10 offices and thousands of employees, and like, hundreds of millions of dollars of market cap. And that was an extraordinary 10-year period where I did that. But I think so then I left, and then I started a couple other companies. But I think the common thread there is I've always worked at some point in the intersection of shifting out of, fine art and making it and being an artist, sort of commercial design art, like the web stuff. The next company after that was Remote Lounge. I built a tech themed bar that was pretty since it got a lot of attention. Some people hated it, some people loved it. It was a surveillance themed bar where there's hundreds of cameras everywhere, and um, you could communicate with people within the bar by calling them on this telephone and clicking your camera through all the channels to pick people, and you could message them and do all these different things. And we did a lot of digital art there too, but part of the theme was to sort of like this almost a dating kind of idea where you back in the days they had these telephone bars where you could call table 37 and you pick up the phone and it would ring their table and you could flirt cute with them, or something like that.
Wow.
So that was the theme of this idea of Remote Lounge. And then after that, I did Sensacell, which was an interactive lighting company. And both of those, the common thread there is that there's also, in addition to sort of like programming and art and design, there is also this physical computing idea. Mm-hmm. So I've worked with a couple partners who are electrical engineers, and I would often do the interface to these very complex systems. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of funny. I'm like not a good electrical engineer, or I'm not whatever, but I know enough to be able to talk to my partner. Same thing with like programming. I can't really do deep back-end programming, but I'm certainly conversant enough to talk to somebody who does and understand what they're saying. And similarly on the design and art side.
Sure. I mean, be a product manager, UX, UI, right. Be able to be a conduit right. between needs assessment and what needs to be delivered, right?
Yes. And so with the education angle too, because I went to school of visual arts and because I taught there, I think that all this sort of kind of works naturally as kind of the AI art evangelist that I am. I love building community. I love the people side of it, the bar side of it. I love the geeky technical aspect of it. I love bringing in people that know more than I do, and I'm perfectly happy to sort of point out my ignorance and things. But also I think my enthusiasm for learning from people that know more than I do is apparent. And I think that's an important part of why AR today is kind of successful and why I'm very happy running it and enjoy doing it.
Sure. So when did you first start dabbling? Was it been like 5 years?
No, up to 2021. Yeah, 3 years maybe.
How have things evolved in those 3 years? If you were to look back, how is it different now than it was 3 years ago?
I think when I first started doing it, maybe even 4 years ago in 2020, it was a very high bar of entry. I was using a program called StyleGAN, and the idea would be that you'd accumulate, let's say, 2,000 photographs mm-hmm. of sort of a subject of a thing that you wanted to. You put them in a database and run the training on your program, and then you would create these incredibly trippy, weird-looking animations out of it as you navigate it. So, what happens? You train these things. It looks at them, finds all these features about the AI, tries to describe them, and then tries to represent everything it understands about the different images in a very complicated multi-dimensional space where every part of the space is a weighted number that kind of relates to the other parts. That's what we call the latent space. So things that are close to each other in latent space in one dimension have something in common in that particular vector, whatever it is. Maybe it's hairy, maybe it's mm-hmm. smooth, maybe, in one, there's many other dimensions that things can be close to or far away from something. So when you do these StyleGAN animations, there's this incredibly sort of like mind-blowing idea that you're creating a latent space and you're traveling from one point in it to another. So you're crossing this hyperdimensional mathematical space and creating an interpolation through there. So what happens is all those early AI where things kind of melt and kind of from one thing to another, and it's very different than a morph because the shapes change too much. The intermediate shapes are actually legitimate images in the latent space. So it's a very, very different concept than a morph. And I remember studying morphs and all those things in school. They're pixel transforms, there's mathematical transforms. You're cross dissolved from one image to the other, but you're also doing a mesh transform of points on one image to points on the other. So you're doing both a two-dimensional mesh and you're doing just a crossfade with with this kind of StyleGAN thing, it's kind of mind blowing. You are actually navigating this latent space and stopping along the way at all the in between images that are potential image that the AI would imagine if I could anthropomorphize, and I don't like it when people do that, but
Right.
just to make it simple, the AI thinks that they're potentially new images. So yeah, so very struck by the weirdness and power of it. But that was a time where you would train something for 2 months and then maybe I'd get like 20, 30 animations out of it, or sometimes I got 60 kind of really cool images. I train on some weird on cacti and get weird mutant cacti kind of growing and shrinking and moving around, and that sort of thing. And I don't know, just completely mesmerized by it. Then things changed very quickly. The whole text to image thing, revolution happened, and millions of people got onboarded into the relative ease of the Stable Diffusion process, which is very different.
There are positives and negatives to that, right? I mean, that onboarding of so many people have access to dabbling, but the creating of what feels like a unique art form for somebody, still takes a lot more work than putting in a text-based query, right? I mean, there's different strata of how makers are using it, right? There are the dabblers at the very bottom, but then at the highest level, it's really a question of how much the artist hand is touching, how much control and input there is.
Sure. And I do think that we circle around these arguments a lot in the space. I mean, certainly there are some people that dismiss AI as, completely stealing images and stealing art. But the thing is, the story is very complicated because, first of all, there's many different types of AI art and many different types of AI artists, and there's many different objectives, in it. So the dabblers, the people that use something like Midjourney, where you just put in a text prompt and get something out, that can be seen as sort of like fan art or genre art, or you're doing demons or anime or waifus, which are sexy. Second Wife kind of, it's an anime category of cheesy anime category, but and I think that's fine. I think people are having fun, but they're not trying to make art with a capital A. They're having a great time doing things within a certain sort of pop culture genre. But it is true, and I think that one of the things that came up in the space, particularly around this idea of post-photographic perspectives, that was something that Alejandro Cartagena of Daily XYZ kind of put out there for everybody, which is that photographers who were very threatened by AI in the beginning sometimes made the best AI artists when they did cross over, because they understood the same principles of like, well, if you can't just make an image, the image has to tell a story, it has to have an atmosphere, or it has to have, the lighting's important, the composition is important, and not being obvious or derivative about that is what makes a photograph stand out. I mean, there's the equivalent of just taking a selfie of your lunch, with your iPhone. That's a photograph technically, but there's that, the difference between that and fine art photography is kind of similar to the difference between sort of genre art and, but one thing we got from that is this idea that it's low effort, which is one of the big critiques and I bought into at first with AI art, is actually not true for a lot of photographers. I had this great interview with Charlie Engman, one of the more stunning AI art photographers. He uses Midjourney, and he says if he gets it on the first time, then that's a good day. He's not arguing with that. He's not arguing with it. If it takes him 2 weeks and it's just not working and not happening, and he eventually gets there, well, that's fine. But that doesn't necessarily, the extra 2 or 3 weeks of wrestling with it, and for him is not what made it a good piece in the end. But that's an interesting perspective, and I think one very tied to photography. And people are endlessly quoting this, Picasso. There's so many versions of it. Like, oh, it took you 3 seconds to make that drawing. Oh, but it took me 30 years to, there's these have become sort of, cliches, a little bit. But I think they're true. I think when you start to sort of break down what people don't like about AI art, and one thing that sticks up is this seems like you're not earning it, or that it's too low effort. bunch of things come to mind, particularly the history of photography and people's
Exactly.
understanding and relationship to photography, which I think is so interesting.
Hmm.
On the other hand, there are still people doing incredibly complicated things that you have to be some sort of high-end physicist to understand the math in. And I think that the variety is like I don't think my art is low effort, and it's a fairly complicated, and it's also not derivative. In fact, I usually use my own images in a database, but that's just me. I think there are many people that will defend the other side of AI art. I think that's important.
I think the corollaries to photography are fascinating. And a lot of things you said there just really resonate with me. And first being just the concept that, yeah, you're right. Somebody can take a selfie of their lunch, but fine art photography, I think a lot of people don't understand how much goes into constructing a fine art photograph and how much of it wasn't necessarily captured in frame, and how much of it, even when we look at Ansel Adams, so much of what we see as the final product was a matter of all the things he was doing in the dark room. That and the fact that all the things that people are saying about AI negatively in terms of being threatened or dismissive are very much the same things they were saying about photography in its advent. And I believe, when we were last together, I was quoting some number about how it was 70 years before photography wound up making an appearance in a museum exhibit. But at the end of the day, they're both tools, right? And it's a matter of how you utilize these tools.
Yeah, I always think that the word tool is interesting. And I do think that I could also make an argument that there's an AI art aesthetic, that it's a media, but I don't think all AI art is, reflects a particular aesthetic, or like let's say plein air watercolor images do. That's an aesthetic where you're matching sort of a medium with a kind of a set of expectations about what is good and bad. But I do think that there are some AI art aesthetics that are kind of maybe bigger than just a tool, because I think that there are things that can only be made with AI. So this is not the stuff where you're fooled, like, oh, is that a photograph? No, it's AI. Gotcha. You know, um, um, it's more stuff that like, what the heck is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what this is. It's sort of an illustration, sort of a photo. It's sort of unreal, or it's an animation where people are sort of melting in and out of themselves, or all kinds of weird magic is happening that is sort of photographic but not. Somewhere between photography and the most fantastic CGI anime or something. I think those kinds of things become possibly a media or an aesthetic or something like that.
Well, I think the interesting thing when you say that is, I think about how that aesthetic is going to reach so many people and wind up influencing a perceived aesthetic at all level of art. It's influencing the way people see things. There could be the impact that that aesthetic winds up creeping into even the handmade, laborious, traditional capital A art world things.
Sure. I mean, and of course, there's some major resistance to AI from the capital A art world, but I do think if you think that Cubism rewired us to look at the sort of the connection between spatial continuity, temporal continuity, and how that goes into representing the human face or the human figure, and not only was it provocative in the sense that you had to learn how to understand it and how to like it. And when you look at that stuff, it's we take for granted that people find it beautiful today or intriguing or wondrous, but it was a hard lesson to learn that this stuff was not just confusing and ugly. But I do think there's certain AI art at the highest level that can have that kind of power, like to force you even to rewire your brain to sort of to understand it and to come to terms with what you're seeing and what it means, artistically, aesthetically, socially, even just coherently, like just like to make it come together to figure out what it is and what it's saying. And I think that's the most interesting.
A couple of years ago, I had Ann Spalter on the podcast. She and her
Oh, she's
husband.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's great. She was talking about how she is just in love with AI, and she is utilizing AI to form the basis for paintings. At least she was 2 years ago, because I think she found that there was a lot less resistance in the capital A art market for traditional painting, even though the underpinning is what she had worked alongside AI to create concept, the basis, but having an output that was in a more traditional form allowed doors not to be closed. Right. It allowed, same doors to remain open. Some of that in a transitional period, but we had AI represented in this year's Whitney Biennial, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, yes. Who are amazing artists also. And amazing, have you interviewed by them, by the way?
I
That'd be a
have
great
not.
interview.
No, I need to get them on
Fascinating.
because
Yes,
I
yeah.
saw their work at the Biennial, and just hearing their story about how they went about constructing those images, it's captivating. And so I would
Yeah.
love to talk to them.
Yeah, Holly's got a great TED Talk. It's a little bit old now, but a couple of years old now, but fascinating for someone really wrestling with the whole possibilities of AI. And they also have another side where they're very pro artist and very sensitive to the idea that they're using databases of trained on images that may have been that in most cases were provided without the consent of the artist. Of course, hopefully that's changing. The new data sets coming out, there's an increasing effort to make data sets a little more responsible in terms of artist rights. The early data sets, of course, were for research purposes, and they were no concern whatsoever about that issue. They were just trying to understand, get as much data together to scrape as the to feed to these training algorithms to see what they could come up with. But Holly and Matt formed spawning.org, which is actually one of the most interesting attempts to sort of reconcile the excitement and the possibility around AI art tools and sort of the responsibility to other artists, which so I think that they're very interesting people on many levels.
So when you're talking to folks at AI Art Today, I mean, obviously it's kind of a public forum. A lot of the conversations kind of revolve around tools and critique and things like that, or are there bigger issues that people are trying to wrestle with as a community?
Well, I mean, I would say it gets as big as does AI represent a existential threat to humanity? We've had so many spaces that where we started talking about something and then they go off the rails and everyone's talking about the singularity and about what's your P doom, which is your percentage chance you think that AI is going to kill everybody. And this is less about AI art now than more the grander, bigger picture of AI and what it represents. Does it represent, the thing that's going to save us from any number of other existential threats, from climate change, our terrible limitations in terms of our tribal warlike identity and all that, or is it going to be the thing that that ultimately decides we need to be replaced with something better, or any number of different ideas? And the thing is that it's very easy to dismiss some of these arguments a few years ago as sort of like, oh, science fiction speculation, but I see these ideas are engaged by all the top AI researchers, and all the smartest people I know are super concerned. So it gets as existential as that. But there's also lots of interesting discussions we have about what it means to be an artist in the world of AI, and what what it means to have such a powerful assistant do so much of the work, and whether that means that we're shifting our idea of artists more to sort of this curatorial kind of idea. But there's not only photography is one model, but I would say generative art is another, because you have these algorithms and you run these algorithms, you don't know what you're going to get, and that's kind of the magic of a lot of sort of art blocks era of sort of generative art. So there's other kind of examples out there that kind of show people wrestling with similar ideas. It is funny, for instance, the relationship of generative art to AI art, because generative art artists would kind of agree with most of that, but they also, generative art has a sort of like traditional art hero. Tyler Hobbs is a genius. He came up with this thing, and he wrote the algorithm, and he did this, and he did that. Of course, the algorithm is built on many other algorithms. He didn't write processing. He didn't write, the software libraries that came with it, but he came up with some very innovative algorithms that he transformed into art. And there's something sort of traditionally heroic about, he as an individual doing this.
Right.
So sometimes even the gen art people don't like the AI art people, even though I think we're in the same boat. We're both using code to make art, because the gen art people have, sort of managed to stick to this idea that an artist is an exceptional person doing exceptional things, and it's this democratization of the tools, where maybe the tools, the difficult parts of being an artist are actually not so difficult anymore, is something that gets resistance even from people that are very deep into the whole idea of algorithmic art as a broad category, or digital art as a category. We also forget that the Photoshop revolution of the 90s was also incredibly controversial at this time. This is going to ruin everybody who knew how to use pen and ink and how to do this and how to draw and how to illustration. And we seem to, it is just very funny that some of the AI art sort of hater contingent is actually very comfortable with using Photoshop without any of the irony of how sort of, difficult a revolution that was in its day.
What do you think the trajectory is here? How will we have the same conversation 5 or 10 years from now? Would it be a question of when are we going to see real representation in the fine art world? I mean, I guess the question is a question of respect.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think one interesting thing about the traditional art world is, for instance, its relationship to NFTs. I think you and I have talked about this. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, Pace has both a very, a legendary traditional fine art, stable in history, and they're also taking a deep dive into NFTs. And you might have told me this, or somebody told me, says, like, what's super interesting about Pace is those two audiences don't intersect. Mm-hmm. That the people that are being promoted on the NFT side, and there's, for sums of money that should get some sort of respect if you're just looking at it from the purely capitalist point of view. And Pace was kind of hoping that those people would be attracted, or drawn to the contemporary art world and vice versa. And there's really no crossover, which I think is kind of interesting. So where this is going, I'm not really sure. I think AI and the NFT people, this is something that I told you that I talked about for 2 years, that you think that they're natural companions also, but there's a lot of lingering bad feelings on both sides toward the other side. We were just talking to, like I said, Civitai is one of the biggest AI places for hosting models, and huge AI community. And we said, well, why don't you use a crypto coin to reward, people for doing work and models? And they're saying, like, all our people would leave because they think NFT is just a bunch of Ponzi schemes, scamming, And it's funny, I talked to NFT people who are so, like, 100% believers in the NFT revolution. Mm-hmm. And they're like, that AI, they're just a bunch of forgers. They're just scamming. None of that's even art. We're making art over here. Those guys are. And it's sort of weird that I do think that I do wonder if there's going to be a little bit of tribalization around this. But I think there's a couple different directions. Some people have pointed out that the better AI gets, the more difficult it is for me as an artist, because it gets so good that it seems like you're doing less and less. And what was particularly fun and interesting about the early AI art is that it kind of made mistakes, and those mistakes were super interesting. Right. And they sort of laid out the sort of like the path for an aesthetic that here is something doing something deeply weird and wrong. And deeply weird and wrong is always an important precursor for doing something interesting in art, in capital AR.
Well, it's really interesting because, it's almost like there's a part of you that would almost want to continue to use the rudimentary tools so you can find the weird stuff instead of things getting slicker and slicker. And Because I mean, I think, one of the appeals to painting is seeing the maker's hand, right? And so, right. I mean, I think there might be the danger of going down a path where it gets so slick that it doesn't appeal, the way we would anticipate otherwise, right?
Or it appeals to a certain crowd for a certain reason. Look, I made a Hollywood movie, all I had was the idea. Within that vast category of people who say that, they're actually, even within that category, like I said, with the post-photography perspectives, there may be one genius who could never make a Hollywood movie, but he has such a good idea and doesn't need to know cameras and lighting and acting and blah, blah, doesn't need to know anything. And he could actually make a singularly perfect work of art. But I'm saying, so there is a possibility, just like with the post-photography perspectives taught me, that Charlie Eggermann is going to make beautiful, original work that all fits together with a coherent kind of aesthetic. And he's using the simplest tools. He's using the same old, set 3 sentences in Midjourney that anyone creating, big boobed demons, is, like for their anime group.
Do you guys ever talk about AI video and the prospect of generating things that feel like films? I mean, or is the majority of the work in this space the still images and in short, evolving sort of looping?
Yeah, I would say that all the discussion, all the action is in video now and in animation. All the excitement is, all the energy going in there. I still like making still images, and I still like pushing different still image things, but there is clearly the excitement has shifted, and I think because the expectation in animation and film is that it's so much more complicated and technical and difficult, and the fact that AI tools are making those kind of creations possible is what's exciting everybody. But again, for me, I do think that as they get better and better, the new set of video tools are so good. There's a string of them. Sora came out, but then was never released, and everyone got super excited about Sora. And then everyone in our group had 2 reactions. One is just like, why am I bothering to learn these very complicated video workflows that I'm building in this tool called Comfy UI, which is kind of like if you're a little bit past the Midjourney stage of just typing in a prompt, and you really want to wrestle with the technology, you'll use this tool called Comfy UI. And it's a node interface. I don't even know what those are, but like there's many examples of them. Touch Designer, Blender, Max MSP has been around for 30, 40 years. And that basically you bring out these little encapsulated boxes and you connect them with patch cords, and then you run flows through them. So the more complicated and sophisticated work being done in AI is using Comfy, and you're using all the different elements of Stable Diffusion workflow. You load a checkpoint, which is your model of all the possible trained images. You use prompts, which is conditioning, and then you use another node to put into latent space, and then you use any number of different things to manipulate the imagery in real time. So that's there's still very, very complicated ways to work with the imagery, but what happened when we saw Sora, we said like, well, why are we, here was our advantage that we could get under the hood and really monkey with this stuff. But now there is a new model out that just does fantastic things, that 10 times better than I do, that all you need is a text prompt for. And I have to say, it's a little deflating when that happens. It's like, well, I have all these skills. I know how everybody else feels, who feels like AI is coming in and railroading their carefully built expertise. And it's funny for us to feel it because we're defending AI against that feeling for long enough. But what happened? Sora never actually was released. OpenAI is playing it very close, and then 6 other companies opened up different ways to work it, and including with Comfy Node abilities for you to get in there and monkey and do it. And I do think that I always see my role as an artist is to get in there under the hood and and work against the idea that it's doing all the work for you to make something perfectly coherent and beautiful and vapid. which is what it wants to do. It wants to take the average of all. It wants to take a girl. It's always, of course, how many images of women, can you see in AI that are so boring and vacuous, but there's, tons of, that's the big part of most of these training sets is people endlessly putting out portraits of women. But for me, if you can work under the hood to sort of break that and transform it and make it go a different way and collage it and rework it and morph it and break the tools and use them in court, that to me will be something that I'll consistently do. And then you'll still use the new technology model to make the resolutions higher, to make the frame rates higher, to make the ability to morph and manipulate the material hot, faster and more interesting. But certainly we're up against this general trend where it becomes easier and easier to make very, very sophisticated, beautiful looking videos and films now. And that's already here. Certainly that already happened with images and Midjourney. Even, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, the quality of the images surpass, people can't tell the difference between that and photography anymore. But we're getting clearly to the point where what you can do in terms of making a 10-second to 30-second film is unbelievable right now, and with very simple prompting.
Try to put yourself in the shoes of a traditional artist, a painter who maybe has background in a number of hands-on materials, and you want to dip your toe in the water because maybe, you want to see how AI might stretch the boundaries of your current art practice. Like, sometimes it's hard for an artist that's been making a particular body of work for a number of years to think about how to stretch the scope. If they wanted to start wading in, where would somebody like that start? Where's the best place? I mean, is there kind of an ascending, are there tools that kind of ascend in complication, and you would suggest starting with one place instead of another?
Yeah, I do think, and one of the things I say to traditional artists all the time, I think people that make things with their hands are always going to be valued by this culture, valued by me, and valued by the culture at large. And I do think that that one thing that I think Emad said it, or Mustak, one of the founders of Stability, said that in fact stuff made by hand is going to have premium value in the culture that's awash with AI images that are low effort and easy to make. So I think that's true on one hand. I do think that what you're talking about is also true. That I think a traditional artist could probably, if broke down with some resistance to it, if they had any, would have a fabulous time with these tools. And I think you can take your traditional art skills and background and apply them to AI art. I think the first place to start is the easy stuff, to see if you like it, Midjourney and all that. I do think one thing that is particularly interesting to look at for artists that have existing work is to use your image as image inputs. First of all, you can query your image and find out what the AI thinks of it. Something called Flip Interrogator, but Midjourney's describe function is very similar, but there's a number of different ways to do this. You're basically saying, reversing the process. And AI is very funny because every process is reversible. Just when you put something in latent space, you take it out of latent space. When you do text to image, you can do image to text. These transformative algorithms actually are mostly bidirectional. So you can input an image and then get it to think, well, what in text latent space does this image represent? You're analyzing it, you're saying, oh, here it is in image space. Here's the equivalent text space. And it's super interesting. So you can then run prompts on that text image, or you can use image prompts in any number of different ways. So David Saleh, is doing this right now. He's been very fascinated by AI, and he's working with this this guy who's writing an app. I think his name's Grant Wood. I'm not sure. I have to check in his name, but he's been working with AI, trying to see if the AI, first of all, was sort of like a quest to see if it could make a David Saleh that was both different than anything he'd made already, but he felt had the same sort of
I think,
punch that a
yeah.
David Saleh did. It wasn't sort of like a pastiche or a remash, or an averaging of things, but it was actually had something that had a little spark. They went like, whoa, like if I had painted that, I would be proud of that. And he's half convinced. He is kind of impressed. He's still not sure yet. But I do think that it's very interesting. There's a great New Yorker article about his whole investigation with it. And to read his fascination with AI is, I think, something I give to people who are traditional artists all the time. I'm saying, have an open mind to the tool. Look at the way David Saleh thought through what AI's possibilities were. And I think that's a great template for kind of understanding the kind of excitement it can bring you. But I would say there's very practical things people are doing right now. If you're an illustrator or a woodcut artist and you have a design you want to do, you might do a couple fast pencil sketches before you finally you draw it out in intricate detail, and then you do the very slow thing. The iteration you get out of AI in terms of variation and permutation and that sort of thing is fundamental. There's nothing like it, so you can input one of your images or four or five and get it to variations on it, and you can rework the variations. A lot of times, this is what happens to me with Chat GPT. I ask it to help me write something. I don't even like what it wrote, but it just jars my writer's block.
Right.
And it says, well, of course I should be talking about this thing. You didn't say it right, but of course I need it. That's the ticket here. And I'm always surprised that, when that happens, and excited by sort of the unfreezing it does.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting because that whole aspect of it is sort of it's sort of like the unfreezing that you would traditionally get in a critique in a studio art education, right? There's really not an infrastructure for critique once you're out there on your own. I mean, hopefully you have two or three friends whose opinion you really value, that can give you feedback that doesn't totally derail you. That's really interesting to think of it as almost feedback, right? And what direction you can take.
Well, I think that's a great point, Greg. I think the critique thing is perfect because that's what the magic of a critique is, that you're looking at your work, you're stuck into a certain way of looking at it, and then someone looks at it and says something about it, and it's instantly like just drops away your whole understanding of what it is you're doing that you weren't getting or blocking. And I think that sort of process, I think, is super helpful for any kind of artist. The AI can really help you rework and redo things in a way that can kind of give you those exciting moments where where suddenly everything drops away and you see where your resistance or something, or just things come together, whether it's resistance or not, in a way that becomes very energizing. It happens to me all the time.
So can you tell me more about the program that you were looking at starting up at SVA?
I thought a lot about what an AI program would be, a master's program would be. And I think the first thing I wrestled with was this idea that the thought went through my head was that this is going to get major resistance from all in departments. So SVA is going to do a program in illustration where, like, oh, we're taking all your jobs. We're going to teach you how to be an illustrator without having to learn how to be an illustrator. Oh, the painting department is going to say, like, oh, you're going to teach people to make images without having to understand, paint. And the CGI department is going to say, oh, here we know Houdini and, Maya and all this kind of stuff. And you're saying, oh, you just type a few words and get all this stuff in. And to me, one of the interesting things about it is that I do think that if you really want to do any of those things, you should go join those departments, and that to be the top level of all those things. But I do think this idea that AI can sort of flatten, what do you want to say, sort of it lowers the bar on sort of on skill attainment and skill acquisition. That has a flip side that's very, very interesting. Yes, it might be a threat to to traditional ways of doing things. Yes, probably the people who do things traditionally are going to still be better in the, for now, for a while, than doing it than the AI, casual version of it. But the thing that you get is that you can probably be a jack of all trades in a way that was never possible before. So that's what I was thinking with the department. How can you be good enough illustrator, designer, typographer, text grant writer, whatever it is, film and video maker, and how can you do all these things rather than just one of them? And to me, I think that one of the more exciting ideas about AI is that if you can be good enough at a bunch of different things with a lower level of skill acquisition, you're sort of an empowered person in a different way. And then maybe you'll find out what it is you really love to do, but you will always have the skill and background to reach across, multiple media, multiple, workflows, multiple technologies. So I think it's kind of interesting. It seems like
that's a really captivating idea. Is that man, if I could live the last 30 years over and have figured out my mistakes more quickly and figure out where passions were, and if I could have just gotten to those things quicker, that's a really captivating idea.
And maybe you were stymied just by sheer lack of hand coordination. If you're drawing, maybe you couldn't draw. So those things kind of fall away, and then you find out where your passions and interests are. And I do think that there is something very powerful about this person who would go through the program, and I think it's kind of like a liberal arts version of being an artist. I would love to see the program be that, like you're a liberal artist in the art sense, because AI has empowered you to be pretty good at a lot of things.
Do you think there would be pushback with having AI in the title, or would it need to have some sort of more vague technology name in the title?
I think it has to be AI, because I think that's the core idea, and I think that AI is a technology that is transforming every aspect of fine art and commercial art, whether we like it or not, just the way the internet did. And I told you that I happened to be at the right place in the right time for the internet revolution. And here I was like, wasted 10 years of my life bartending in the East Village and hanging out and being a bohemian and making silk screens. And then I get my MFA, and then the internet comes around, and then suddenly me, not a business guy, gets to run and build a big company and be at a point of disruption where I actually understand more than the people that have been doing it for 20 years understand, because I understand what the disruption is about and what it represents. So I do think that there's an opportunity in AI right now, and I do think you need to call it what it is. AI is enabling this disruption, and I do think that you need to embrace it and understand that it represents an opportunity to sort of get on board and operate on the positive side of disruption, because certainly there is going to be a lot of negative side.
Well, I want to send people to your website, madbutter.com, and when they go there, they're going to have ways to contact you if they have interest in this SVA program, but they're also going to have the ability to see your work. And I know you have a release coming up, the wonton soup. Can you talk a little bit about that body of work? And it's so hard for people to try to describe what something looks like, over a podcast. But
and I guess when you like it, you always feel like you're underselling it, you're nailing it down when you're hoping it's bigger than a simple description, or better or more difficult. But I do think that it goes along with what I'm saying is that a lot of people are trying to make sort of vapidly pretty things. These are a little grotesque and a little strange and a little uncomfortable, but not that uncomfortable. So didn't go all the way to horror too, which is its other genres and expectation and body horror and gross out stuff. But I do think that what I like about this is the sort of the mashup surrealist idea of AI, and particularly that you can sort of image mix. You mix images and prompts and different things from very different fields and arenas and eras and aesthetics and arrive at something particularly different. You can sort of like navigate some uncharted territory. And that's what I'm trying to do with this last set of things. There's these dark folklorish kind of creatures I made by putting in very, very different prompts. And I got these sort of strange blobby creatures with lots of eyeballs all over them that some people find just grotesque, but most people have said actually some of them are sort of weird, like they want to, they're disdainful. Some of them say, well, they're actually sort of like want to be your friend, or you're not sure. But then I mixed those in with some Renaissance painting,
Right.
and that's what wonton soup is. They're kind of like these creatures became fleshy, and I
Yes.
think I really like the sort of the fact that it doesn't settle, like
Yeah, it's
that's
kind of
what I think AI art
and
does.
it's kind of a raw chicken skin sort of fleshy
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
right?
So it's not a sexy fleshy, but it's actually not a straight up body horror.
No.
And sometimes they look like yeah, you don't know if they want to eat you, or they want you to love them and take care of them unconditionally, even though they're kind of ugly, or whether they they're disdainful of all humanity, or or whatever. I mean, that's what I get from them. And I don't know if they're painting or photography or illustration. I also like this sort of genre mashing that AI does well. I mean, clearly they're not. There's something a little bit photographic of them that takes them away from painting, and a little bit painting that takes them away from photography, and a little bit fantastical, which sort of puts them in the whole sort of like fantastic illustration kind of camp, but uneasily doesn't straddle any of those. So to me, it's all about trying to get someplace that doesn't settle. I know what that is. I want you to say, I have no idea what that is.
No, I mean there's some of them that feel very aquatic to me, but then there are others like, oh well, there's a tree in the background, and then then there's some negative spaces where I'm like, well that really feels like Max Ernst. I mean there are all these it's like at every corner I'm feeling maybe that's just the nature of the art form, like I'm getting little reminders of different signals to different things, in all the different places, in the image, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that a lot of AI tools are built precisely to bring you sort of like something that is a perfect example of a genre or a thing. Like if you got the perfect vampire, after all you're like, the AI did great. That model gives a better vampire than the other vampire, and there's something, its job is to do something to give you, so the critiques against AI is, okay, it gives you like someone wrote this great uh, article called Mean Images, and they meant that first of it's mean because it has this
Got it.
association with surveillance and oppression and authoritarianism. AI does, but mean as in just like the mean, like that. In other words, it's the perfect average. It's the next.
Right.
It's a predictive pattern. It's whatever. I think the more interesting approaches to AI are when you work against that. Every time it tries to give you something that is pretty or obvious, or what it is, you try to wrench it in a different direction. And its ability to absorb and input things that are so radically different from the vast world of image production and image creation that the most interesting thing to do is to try to pull things that don't belong together. That's a classic, surrealist trope anyway. The idea, the umbrella and the sewing machine, whatever it is, the sewing machine on a dissecting table. When that works, it's not just anything that's a mismatch. Oh, I took this from the 1940s and I mixed it. Like that's just guessing. But when you see something where there's an underlying connection with it that you never would have guessed or seen or understood, and you can't quite put your finger on it, then I think you're touching a little subconscious nerve that is interesting.
Well, Matt Butter, I really appreciate you giving me an hour to talk about these things. If folks want to follow you, they can find you every day at AI Art Today on X Spaces. If they want to see your work, they can go to madbutter.com, and they can reach out to you there if they have more questions about some of the topics we've discussed, right?
Absolutely. My DMs on X on Twitter are open. I'm Mad Butter 6. Somebody took Mad Butter. I don't know who, but somebody did. So I'm Mad Butter 6. You can also go look at AI Art Today. I think the actual Twitter thing is AI Art Today 420, because somebody had AI Art Today also. But AI Art, that's where all the spaces get announced and put out for promotion, so that you can easily come and join a space if you think you're interested in hearing what we're talking about with AI. It's always a very lively conversation. It's a real mix of people that have some deep knowledge of AI, with some folks who just wander in, who want to know what it's all about, and a couple trolls who want to tell us that we're ruining the world and everything. It's always entertaining.
Awesome.
But everyone's welcome to come. I think it's
All
right. Well, tend to love it.
Hey man, I really appreciate your time.
Hey, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Craig. I've really always enjoyed all of our chats about art, technology, culture, life, everything. So.
Absolutely. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to ArtSense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. And if you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read the transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to canvia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@canvia.art. Thanks for listening.